Hello class, my name is Ben Brown and I currently teach history at Emmaus Bible College and coach soccer in Dubuque, Iowa. And while I'm not going to be able to show you any actual American Revolution sites, there's none near here, what I can do is walk you through a presentation on a site that I've developed some recent interest in, and hopefully by the end you'll have some excitement and interest in possibly visiting yourself as well. So without further ado, let's take a look at the Penobscot. Adjust this here. Penobscot Expedition, which according to historical author Bernard Cornwell is the worst U.S. naval disaster that you've never heard of. Move on here. My inspiration for doing this, I read his book, The Fort, based on this story of this site over Christmas break. Great job of historical research, and also directed me towards a lot of history, a lot of resources that I was able to use to do research for this presentation on the fort, including at the museums and some primary sources. So the background of the story itself: June 1779, the British began construction of a fort at the River Bagaduce in Massachusetts, which is now technically Castine, Maine. So this is where it's at, right? A little context. Not too far from Nova Scotia. This is where the British sent their ships from to build a fort. And for context, it's not too far from Boston. Right? Now, the rationale behind Fort George itself: Penobscot Bay was an ideal location to deter American privateers from making raids and attacking British ships. They were able there to limit colonial timber shipments, which allowed them to build more ships and have more privateers. They thought it would be an ideal refuge for loyalists who lived especially in the north, or those who might want to be fleeing from Boston. It also is a good location for protecting Nova Scotia from potential colonial designs on Canada itself. The British logistics, right? The commander of the fort was General Francis McLean. He's the one who named it Fort George after the king. Their naval commander, Captain Henry Mowat. You can also learn about famous participant John Moore. This is his first battle as a 17-year-old. Troop count, he had about 700 troops or so, plus a few merchant marines that could fight for him. 3 sloops were the only ships that he had with 50 guns available. You can imagine Massachusetts wasn't particularly thrilled about having this fort to the north, and so what they did was they assembled the largest American naval force of the Revolutionary War. Their naval commander, Commodore Dudley Saltonstall, had 40 to 42 vessels, including 19 warships and 350 guns at his disposal. He also had 2,000 seamen or so operating the ships, along with a handful of Marines who were good at hand-to-hand combat. Field Commander General Solomon Lavelle had approximately 870, some say more, Massachusetts militiamen at his service to fight. Some famous participants are Peleg Wadsworth. We'll talk about him, who was his capable second-in-command, as well as Artillery Commander Paul Revere. You might have heard of him. July 25th, 1779, the expedition arrives at Penobscot Bay, where the Americans have early success. They manage to take the high ground and capture a British battery. Fort George was on the verge of surrender. In fact, General McLean said after the battle, "I believe the commanders of the American troops, the colonists, were a pack of cowards, or they would have taken me. For I was in no position to defend myself. I meant to give them only 1 or 2 guns, that I might not be called a coward and then strike my colors, as I did not wish to throw away my men's lives for nothing." But there was a problem, a catch-22. You see, Saltonstall, the Commodore, refused to enter the harbor with his ships before the fort was taken. On the flip side, Lavelle refused to attack the fort until the British sloops were taken. You can imagine this was a problem. So as they tried to find other ways to take the fort and the sloops, the result was that Fort George continued to strengthen its defenses over time. The British reinforcements eventually arrived in the form of several massive frigates 2 weeks later, Right? And the American Navy, who was blocked in the bay, attempted to flee up the Majabigwaduce River. All except 1 American ship was either captured or destroyed in their attempts to flee. The British controlled then Penobscot Bay until the end of the war. Now, the aftermath of the battle, right, you can imagine the Massachusetts General Assembly was curious why the Americans lost with so many more soldiers and ships. Eventually, they came to blame Commodore Dudley Saltonstall, and he was eventually removed from service as a whole and actually went off as a privateer. More interesting, maybe to us, is that Artillery Commander Paul Revere was court-martialed for disobeying orders, for showing disrespect to both Lavelle and Wadsworth. Right? He was accused of behavior bordering on cowardice. So why is Revere so famous today, right? We know about Paul Revere because of his famous time.
The British are coming, the British are coming.
Good old Paul Revere for us.
Ride of Paul Revere.
Right. We know about the ride of Paul Revere, but why don't we talk about William Dawes or anybody else who went out with him that night? We just don't know any history, do we? Well, this is why Revere was so famous. Interestingly, he didn't become famous until Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, just before the Civil War, wrote the famous poem about him, "Listen, my children, you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." It rhymed conveniently. Wadsworth took advantage. Now, the irony here is that Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was the grandson of Peleg Wadsworth, who was one of the people who threatened to arrest and had testified against Paul Revere. So, listen, my classmates, and you shall hear or have heard another side of Paul Revere, quote by me, right? So why should we go on a trip to Castine, Maine? Why check it out? Why go for yourself? Well, it's an opportunity to remember a forgotten battle, right? In biblical principle, God told the people of Israel to remember, so they could learn, so they could praise Him. We should do the same with our own nation's history. Plus, it was the greatest American naval defeat before Pearl Harbor. This was a significant battle to forget. It's an opportunity to increase our knowledge of famous historic figures like Paul Revere, John Moore, Peleg Wadsworth, and it should really challenge us to consider and really weigh carefully who we lift up as heroes. It could give us insights into theological motives for fighting, both on the British and the American side. There's several museums there where you can look at both sides, right? And on a less serious note, if you're a soccer coach like me, maybe you want to get in a match with your students, right? Because right next to the old fort that you could visit are some athletic fields with some soccer fields set up most of the year. So what I want to do real quick again, just in review, the opportunity that you would have to visit a place like this, the benefit is you get to remember a battle that's been forgotten. You get to learn more about some historical figures that we as Christians, we have a responsibility to be discerning about who we lift up and praise as heroes, right? We all have a human nature, and we need to be careful. And last of all, right, history, this is part of history. It's part of God's story, and I'm always wanting to know more about why God is doing what He is doing in history. So there's great opportunity there. Look forward to learning with you this semester. Hope you enjoyed the video. Take care and have a blessed day. Bye.